Welcome to the first official episode of the Inside the Castle podcast. The Inside the Castle podcast goes behind the castle doors to have real conversations with real people about solving the nation's toughest challenges. I'm one of your hosts for today, Lauren Leik.
And I'm Aaron Snyder. Today's guest is the Director of Civil Works, Mr. Al Lee. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Lee.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you today.
Great. Thank you, sir. Mr. Lee started as the Director of Civil Works at the beginning of this year, and today we have a great opportunity to talk with him about his reflections so far in this leadership role, as well as the challenges the agency is currently facing and how he is working to address them.
Mr. Lee, first we want to talk a little bit about your background. Could you give us a little overview of your career, how you ended up as the Director of Civil Works, and maybe throw in a little bit something about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'll start off with a personal story, kind of where I grew up, because it really helped kind of shape and inform me and kind of my career and the direction I went. Grew up in rural America, grew up in a farming community, and, started working when I was probably 10 years old, part-time, and that's kind of the culture that I think helped shape me, because when you work on a farm, there's a lot of intrinsic things that you pick up along the way, and that you just don't see in other places that you work. First of all, you have to be innovative. You have to adapt to what you have. You can't make a trip to town every hour when something breaks. You have to fix it. You have to find materials that you have and use those materials to develop or repair or build or whatever you're doing, because you just don't have the time to go make trips all the time to do that. Not to say that you don't make trips, but you really, it makes you, I think it helps develop a mindset that you think differently about things. I believe that, I did a lot of different things. I worked in tobacco. I worked in timber. I did agricultural farming. I worked with hogs, cows, livestock. So a lot of different things that I worked with. In all those different areas of farming, you learn a little different nuance of what it takes to be successful. And so one of the things that it taught me was that I became a morning person pretty early in my life. So waking up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning was pretty normal, especially in the summers when I wasn't in school. That was kind of the peak agricultural season. So, I've been a morning person since I was pretty young. So I still am. That habit has not changed. But I think that it also allows you to be fresh. Your mind's fresh in the morning. You get to think about things that you want to do, and really think through things when it's quiet, when all the other activities are not going on, when your cell phone's not ringing, when your email's not going off. And so that's kind of a sort of a personal story of my background and how I grew up.
Great. Thank you, sir. Yeah, that was great. I had no idea that you grew up on a farm. And I can definitely see how that experience has really led to your career going forward and your leadership roles that you now serve. Wanted to get a little bit about your background. I know you served in a lot of leadership roles throughout the Corps. Could you just briefly talk about some of the leadership roles that you've served prior to becoming the Director of Civil Works?
Sure, Lauren. I started off, I was in the Army for 26 years, and I was an engineer officer in the Army. And about at the halfway point in my career, I started talking to some mentors that I had. General Anderson was one of my early mentors. He was with me in the Green Suit Army, and then he also was in the Corps of Engineers as a senior leader. And General Anderson and I started this engagement about, kind of what's next. Do you track in the military as a purely tactical track, or do you want to expand your horizons and start thinking differently about what you want to do in the future? And so that was my opportunity to go to graduate school. So the Corps of Engineers paid for my grad school full time. And so I went to grad school for a year and a half. And then from that, you have a utilization tour. And that was my first experience with the Corps. So I was assigned to the Alaska District, worked in a project in a resident office. I was a deputy resident engineer, did that for a couple years. Now I had a great opportunity to work with ERDIC in the Coal Regions Research Lab, completely different than typical Corps construction of either MILCON or international interagency support or environmental work that we were doing in the district. And this was more focused on ice research. So what do you do in cold weather climates? How do you adapt that and help support the military? We did engagements with Korea in how they did cold water crossings in the middle of the winter. A lot of research on climate assessments, climate change. They have a permafrost tunnel up in Alaska that shows what really it looked like millions of years ago and how that evolution is occurring now, and we're all seeing it throughout the world. So a lot of interesting introspect that I picked up in those first two assignments. And then I shifted gears and I was the Charleston District Commander in Charleston, South Carolina. Following that, I went back to military for a short period and then went out to the Front Range in the Rocky Mountain area in the Colorado Springs area, was in a resident area office there for a couple years, and then went out from that and went to corporate fellowship with Caterpillar, and then came back to the Corps, and that's when I went to New Orleans following Katrina. I was the commander in New Orleans during the reconstruction after Hurricane Katrina, and that was just a great opportunity to learn and engage. And then following that, went up to the headquarters. I was executive director for Civil Works, and then I retired from active duty. I competed for a senior executive service position in the MBD. That was in 2011, and I became the MBD regional business director. I also deployed downrange with U.S. Forces Afghanistan. Did a 6-month tour as a SES, working for U.S. Forces Afghanistan, and then I came back to MBD, transitioned to SAD as a programs director for 5.5 years. We had some key mega projects and a lot of port modernization in the region there, and then most recently transitioned up last year to the Transatlantic Division before the Civil Works Director opportunity came open. So that's kind of a brief history of where I've been and the leadership engagements that I've been involved in with the Corps.
Great, thank you. So you've obviously had a lot of different opportunities throughout the Corps and a lot of different experiences. How do you think diversifying your career and having those variety of experiences has made you a better leader?
Well, I think one of the things is it makes you have to learn the organization that you're at. So you really have to become a really good listener because every one of the organizations I've served at was different. It had different cultures. It had different capabilities, and they had different missions that they were accomplishing. Some of them were similar, but some of them were vastly different. And so really, I think the depth and breadth of the experience that I've had in the Corps has helped shape me in understanding the capabilities that the Corps of Engineers can bring to a table, and really about the integration across our functional areas to make that a reality. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges is that how do we effectively integrate across our functions to deliver the best product to the nation?
That's great, sir. Looking back, I wanted to reflect a little bit of your time, while you worked on a farm and how you had to be innovative and work to get things done. And what that meant a lot of times, I also grew up on a farm, so I can relate a lot to this, is that, you need to do what you need to do to get it done, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And it seems like within the agency, sometimes we struggle with that balance between, perfection and good enough. And what advice would you have to leaders to be able to figure out when it's good to be good enough, and trust their staff? And what do you think leadership needs to do to really be able to move forward with that, to make sure we can be as responsive of an agency as possible?
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron, for that question. I think the key thing is that you have to lead by example. And so leaders set the tone. So if the expectation is perfection, we all, even if we get there, it'll change tomorrow. So really setting an expectation for what is acceptable and what's not, and then setting a target and a timeline and holding people accountable for meeting that timeline. I've been engaged in a few things lately that have required us to act very quickly, but produce a quality product and to integrate that across multiple functions. And I'll just give you an example. I found myself where you have to adapt your leadership style into being collaborative and getting people to pull their talents together and do that. But in some cases, you have to be directive and you have to say, pencils down, we're done. We're done with this. We've talked about this, and we need to move on to the next target. And so I think as a leader, you have to be able to both be collaborative and get people to provide their input, to kind of synergize that input and discuss it and maybe argue about it a little bit. But at some point, you have to make a decision, put the pencil down and move on. And, we've had some kind of live cases since I came up to the headquarters where we've been under very tight timelines to deliver things. That's just what we had to do, and I think that's a good model to follow.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the big challenges we see in the agency is that a lot of our leadership starts as technical staff. They're focused on the details, maybe that perfection. As a leader and as folks are becoming supervisors where they're maybe a section chief or a branch chief and moving up through the organization, what transition do you think they need to make as leaders as they move from more technical to strategic?
Yeah, I think this is what I've told a lot of people throughout my career. I'm a strong proponent of having developmental assignments outside of your comfort zone. So, when I was the programs director in SAD, about 90% of my employees in the directorate had done a developmental assignment outside of what they normally did. And I highly encouraged it. It meant that they either came to the headquarters, they went and did something at a district, they did something else in the MSC, the division, to broaden their scope of understanding and perspective. Because I think when you can broaden your scope of understanding and perspective, it helps pull you out of what you're comfortable with. Because like you said, Aaron, when you're technically focused and you develop a certain subject matter expertise related to that technical capability, then you get real comfortable with that. And sometimes that's your comfort is knowing what you know about that specific technical skill or knowledge. And I think if you pull away from that and challenge yourself across the board and become a better communicator, that then you don't get wedded so much to that technical piece, that you can think broader and bring in other perspectives, other functions, help integrate that, and then bring it up to a higher level so you can more effectively communicate.
Great, thank you. And so you talked about technical leadership. We also know that we have leaders throughout the organization who are at many different levels. They might not be formally in a leadership position, but they're definitely leading change and leading the organization at their level. What advice do you have for those folks who might not be in an official leadership position, but are trying to lead change throughout their organization in their day-to-day job? Yeah,
I think it's important because, the good ideas typically come from the bottoms up. When we talk about the whole revolutionized concept, it really is a grassroots. That's what we want it to be, a grassroots movement that comes up from the bottom, that people feel free. They feel freedom. They're freed to provide suggestions, ideas, and to get those incorporated in what we're trying to do to revolutionize the Corps. And so I would just encourage those non-supervisory informal leaders to every opportunity they get to keep pushing and providing that information and feedback to their chain of command and to other. There are other influencers in the organization that are not in their formal chain of command. So I think it's important. A lot of districts have what either anonymous feedback, drop boxes, the Revolutionized team. They can connect with the Revolutionized team. I think that's one of the strengths of the Revolutionized team it's connected directly to the DCW, the Director of Civil Works, and Mr. Fisher over in the ASA's office. And so there's a direct connection at very high levels on a continuous basis. So I think anything that can be fed into that organization is a possibility that it may get legs, and it may be evaluated further as we move forward.
Yeah, that's good. And talking about trust and our leadership and that connection to the Revolutionized Civil Works effort really leads us to our next really focus area here is talking about our strategic areas of improvement. About a month ago, we had a leadership session where leaders adopted 5 strategic areas of improvement where we're focused on improving how we execute as an agency. And just wanted to see, why do you think that revolutionizing Civil Works and USACE is important? And then how do these strategic areas tie in, and what should staff be doing at all levels to implement that?
Well, I think we all recognize, especially this year, that the world around us is constantly changing. And it's adapting and evolving, whether we agree with it, whether we like it or not. And so in order for us to remain relevant, we have to adapt and revolutionize to really capture the things that we need to do to change ourselves, change our organization in order to better deliver for the nation. So that's really what it's about. It's about us being relevant and really being responsive to the nation. And I think, during COVID, we've proven that we can be an adaptable organization. I think there are areas within our organization that are very adaptable. If you look at how we respond to emergencies across USACE, I think we're very, very adaptable in that. I think if you get back in our core functional areas, there are some areas there that we still need to revolutionize. We need to change. We need to adapt. And I think it gets tying it back to the strategic areas of improvement. It's been pretty clear that there are 5 strategic areas of improvement that we have, and I'll define just what I believe a strategic area of improvement is. It is an essential strategic area within the Civil Works function that we need to focus on in order to enable us to better deliver our programs and projects. And so we've got feedback from the Secretary on improving partnerships with federal, non-federal agencies and our program and project sponsors, building a trusting organization. I think we all understand that all relationships have to be built on trust. So trust is a very, very key component of that. And then adapting to a modern virtual world. I think we've all talked about that for decades. When I was in the Alaska District in 1995, we were talking about a paperless office. And so we were talking about that in 1995. Well, guess what? In 2020, we actually got to implement that concept through electronic routing, where we're not pushing paper around for approvals anymore. And why did we do it? It wasn't because we wanted to do it. It was because COVID forced us to do it. And so and you have to take advantages of that. I think, that whole thing, my whole point about adapting to a modern virtual world is there is a lot of capabilities out there, from artificial intelligence, machine learning, that can help us do our jobs a lot more efficiently and effectively. And so I'm looking forward to really adapting under this strategic area of improvement. And then enhancing our programming, project financing, the delivery tools. The key thing for me related to this is, is using data to make informed, data-driven decision making. So if we can get to a point where we have this information freely available to leaders in a format that they can readily look at and pull the key takeaways from that, I think it'll be better for us in delivering, instead of having to go ask somebody to do a data pull to answer a specific question that we have. So I think that, and then the last one is innovative replacement and modernization strategies. I think the big one that we have ahead of us is, we all know that we have a lot of capital investments in infrastructure, and we've got to replace it over the next 30 to 50 years. And there are a lot of things that I believe that we could use innovation, R&D, advanced prototyping, a lot of other things to help us get at some of the replacement, rehabilitation of our infrastructures. And that includes how we finance it, how we budget for it, and how we do our business.
Yeah, I think this is an exciting time. Looking back at some of my career in the Corps, and a lot of times in the past we've gotten things like the campaign plan and other strategic plans, and they haven't been necessarily super inspiring per se, but it seems like, looking at these strategic areas of improvements and really enabling and allowing staff to move forward, that this could be something that inspires us and helps the staff drive some of these changes from the bottom up. Lauren, what do you think about some of this?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And so, Mr. Lee, what do you think our leaders and staff across the Corps should be doing to really enable this change that we want to see through Revolutionize Civil Works and through the agency more broadly?
Well, I think one is, first of all, it starts at the top. So, one of the things when I first came in is the DCW was a recognition that that I was going to be the champion for the Revolutionize effort for Civil Works. And, I know that the chief overall has responsibility for the entire agency for that Revolutionize part, but for me, it's in the Civil Works Directorate, I am the champion for it. And so, lead by example, going back to what I talked about earlier, my expectation is that all our SES leaders are also engaged in the Revolutionize effort. And I was pleasantly surprised when I came on board and we started going through our monthly and weekly battle rhythm meetings with the Revolutionize effort, that I didn't have to ask the SESs to be at the meeting; they were at the meeting. So that tells me that they view the Revolutionize effort as valuable. I also noticed that Mr. Fisher consistently participates in the Revolutionize updates and is engaged in it. And, and it's driven a lot of good behavior. So I'll just give an example. The delegation of CAP authorities, Continuing Authorities Program, when we started this, we had one request that went to the Secretary, and then from that, the Secretary looked at it and started saying, why can't I delegate all of this? And then what transpired from that was engagement from the Secretary. So every Monday, when we engage the Secretary in our updates, he asks, where is my delegation on CAP? So we're taking that all the way to the top levels of leadership in not only the Corps of Engineers, but in the ASA's office, and they are fully supportive and very complimentary of the work that we're doing in the Revolutionize effort. They understand we're not finished. We're just getting started, but it is a great effort to see the levels of engagement from our leadership And I think it goes back to that leading by example. When everybody's doing this, and other people start saying, well, I've got to be a part of this. And, my whole premise is that we want to create irreversible momentum, that we get the organization to a point where people understand the value, recognize the value, and want to be part of the effort, and they understand that we're not going back to where we were in the past. So that's the key parts from my perspective.
Yeah, that's good, and it kind of brings up a question as to where are we going, and where do we see the organization in 15, 20, 30 years? But maybe more importantly, from the Revolutionized Civil Works perspective, what does success look like?
Yeah, I think success looks like when we are doing partner engagements, and I'll just give you an example. So we did, this is a kind of a technical policy document that we did, a levy engineer circular, and it went out as a very technical, bureaucratic document. We sent it out to the public, and they let us know about it. They lit up the phone lines with the ASA and our headquarters, and they said, we don't understand this. It doesn't make sense. It's confusing. It's got this technical information in it. And so, we took a different approach. Phoebe Purcell, our leader and supervisor over that function, brought in some different people, non-technical, kind of human relations type people in that whole aspect of communication, not just from the technical standpoint, but how do we effectively communicate? And so they completely revamped that EC, and now it's very understandable. We're getting very positive feedback. I did a read of it, and I was just amazed at how different it was from the technical speak that we were started off with, how well organized and communicative it is now to the public. And then we'll use an engineer pub to put all that technical things that needs to be communicated internally within the Corps and leave the policy document the way it is. So I think we do need to think about how we communicate with the public and how that interface, because I think, how do we see success? I think that's an example of how we see success. We engage our partners, we listen to their feedback, we're willing to change, we adapt, and then we deliver.
Great. Thank you for that example. I think that really does demonstrate some of the trust that we're trying to build as an organization, really listening to our partners and making changes based on their feedback. And so wanted to talk a little bit about trust, because we know that it's important both externally to the organization, but also internally with our staff. And as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Lee, building a trusting organization is one of the strategic areas of improvement through Revolutionized Civil Works. So for your perspective, what does our organization need to do to build trust, and what do you find most important to build that trust within our organization and with our partners?
Yeah, that is, it sounds like an easy question, but it is pretty complex and tear it apart, because I think we all understand the complexity of the Civil Works program, our authorities, and the legal requirements that we have to meet in order to execute our program. But I'm going to try to boil it down to some pretty simple concepts, because that's the way I think about it. If I can think about it in a simple context, then I think I can actually do something about it. So first is transparency. You have to be transparent, and you have, and with transparency, but is directly tied to an engagement and listening. So you have to engage, and you have to be willing to listen, and then not just listen, but you have to be able to respond, and then you have to verify what they're telling you, how it relates to what we do. So just because the non-federal sponsor tells us they want to do something differently, we can't just say, yeah, we're going to do that. We have to go back and see what the statutes are, and then we have to say, and we have to verify, what are they really trying to get to? So it may require additional engagement and clarification of what they're really seeking to attain in that change or feedback they're giving. But really, I think in order to do that, when you bring it back to our organization, you have to collaborate across functional areas. Because, as you know, working in civil works, there's rarely one issue that's in one function within the Corps. It's in multiple functions. It requires a lot of collaboration across functions. You have to take that information, and then you have to think through it. You have to integrate it, and then you have to make a decision. And so what gets us in trouble a lot of times is we will take a myopic approach of one functional area without considering the impacts to other functions and to the public or to other stakeholders. And we think we have the perfect solution until it gets published or gets produced in a policy document or whatever, and then there's a reaction to it. We've got to be better about that. We need to have our partners engaged early in the process and throughout the process. You know, at the district levels, that includes including them in our project review boards. It includes when you're delivering bad news to a partner, that you're not doing it in an email or a letter, that you're out actually publicly face-to-face engagements with our partners. You know, I had a rule that I never like to deliver bad news to a partner through an email or a letter. I would actually go out and do that engagement, and I think that helps build trust. Even though they may not like the answer, they will respect the fact that you did the engagement, that you were transparent with them, you laid out the argument and showed them why the decisions were that you were having to make. And I think that goes a long way in better communicating with our non-federal sponsors and partners.
Yeah, that seems to be an important part of trust, is having those hard conversations. I mean, it seems like it's really easy to be like, hey, here's the good news, or, you know, yes, sponsor, we're going to try to get you this money. We can be all optimistic about it. But the reality is sometimes you have those projects that maybe we're not the best agency to deliver the project, and we need to be able to communicate that. But, you know, that trust also goes within the organization. It seems like organizationally, sometimes there's a lack of trust. I've worked at the headquarters division and with districts, you know, over the years, and you hear people say things like, oh, I don't trust the district, or I don't trust headquarters. And really that, you know, ties into our process and the bureaucracy of some of this, but really, too, it ties into accountability. And wondering, you know, what your thoughts are on accountability. I think I read somewhere where it's talked about, like, if everybody's accountable, nobody is. And what can the agency do better to make sure we have accountable individuals and we take that next step as it pertains to trust?
Well, from a leadership perspective, I think it's lead by example. I mean, that I keep saying that, but I really do believe it. You know, on the trust and accountability thing, you know, President Reagan probably said it best: trust but verify. So the piece of that goes back to data-driven decision-making. So if we have the data that is in our information systems, it's readily available to all of our people in the Corps, it makes things a lot easier. And that's tied to performance metrics. So you're setting expectations through performance metrics, and then you're measuring those through data-driven tools that you have so that you can make appropriate decisions, and more importantly, timely decisions, so that you're not having to go out and do a data call or a data pool to pull something in, and then you get the human intervention into the culture that you talked about, and that culture can be strong. And I think that there just needs to be a better way of doing that that's transparent, that is clean information that comes up, so when people see it, it is a quality level of information. And then the thing about the trust between districts and multiple levels of the organization, you know, I found that phenomenon throughout my career. According to what level you were at, you always thought, or there were perceptions that the higher headquarters didn't really understand what you were doing, and they were all messed up. And so But as you work your way up to the top, and now I'm in a position where I can't say that much more because there's really not too many more people above me. But I think the key thing that I've learned throughout my career is that the more diversity you have in your experiences and at different levels and different things that you do, the less that's true. I think if you are stovepiped within a certain function, and that's the only thing that you know, then your sphere of influence and understanding is pretty small. But if you have multifunctional experience, I think you start learning things that, well, it's not as simple as that. This takes a lot more understanding. It's multifunctional, how you pull that together and get people to kind of coalesce on a certain aspect that they may not all have 100% agreement, but there's enough agreement that you can move forward. So, but I think it goes back to what I said earlier about the leadership part. It really focuses on the part about people having diverse experiences, giving people professional development opportunities, and getting outside their comfort zone, working at different levels of the organization so they understand those different levels and what they do at different levels. Because at the district, you're talking about executing. That is your primary function, is execution. When you go to the MSC, you're talking about some execution, but that's your first level of policy. So and so that's different. It's more they're helping the districts interpret what they can and can't do, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and then at the headquarters, we are, that should be our main focus is policy. We do get involved in other things just because of where we're located, our location in the nation's capital, our proximity to the White House and Congress and other national stakeholders. So there are some differences in what we do, but I think in order to continue to build trust, I think we need to really encourage our employees to have multidisciplinary experience throughout the depth and breadth of the organization.
All right. Well, those are really good points about diversity and experience in particular. And one thing one way I guess that leadership can really help expand the diversity of staff and experience is to use something called dynamic subordination. The concept there is where a leader is able to basically give full authority to a staff member to lead specific items. And that's one really good way for leadership across the board to be able to say, here's my good employee, I want to give them some experience, so I'm going to trust you and give you authority to carry out this specific task or mission, where they don't have to be involved entirely. Because it's really impossible, like you said, for leaders to know everything about everything, but what you really have to do is be able to trust your staff and enable them to be able to move forward with some of these objectives. And that's really a value of diversity and diversity of experience, I think.
And picking up on diversity, so, an issue that relates to that and trust within our organization is, the broader social justice issues that our nation and the organization are trying to better address. Mr. Lee, wanted to get your thoughts on that. How has civil unrest affected the Corps, and what steps are you taking to address these issues within our organization?
Well, Lauren, thanks for asking that question. I think this year has been a very interesting year on a number of fronts. We've experienced the impacts of COVID. COVID has caused us to adapt. We're all working and having this conversation virtually right now. So what was true back in January, February is not necessarily true today. And so with everybody being inside, a lot of people being isolated, I think, over time there has been some frustration and anger that's built up, especially in the minority community. And we talk a lot about trust, and I think really it gets to that aspect of trust. And, from my perspective, I can't sit here and tell you that I fully understand the frustration and life experiences of people people of color, whether they're in uniform or out of uniform, the people that we work for in our office, we work with in our office. I think our minorities that work in the Corps of Engineers, it is a different perspective that they have of how they're treated in our country, the opportunities that they have, and I'll try to give some examples of kind of how I've seen this in my career. When I showed up to command in the New Orleans district, it was a very devastating time after Katrina, the impact of Katrina. A lot of people have lost their lives. They lost everything they owned. And, one of the things that we were struggling with in the Corps of Engineers at the time was a very high turnover of people, getting talent and hiring people. So one of the first things I asked my CPAC chief, our civilian in charge of HR, human resources, is what are our percentages of what we're hiring internally versus externally? So they came back and told me 60% were coming internally from the organization, 40% were coming externally. And that's a pretty low number if you think about it, what's coming from outside the organization. So over the 3 years that I was commander there, we changed that dynamic greatly. We did a lot of engagement with historically black colleges and universities. We had over 31 relationships with engineering deans throughout the nation, and a lot of those were with HBCUs. And so what we started doing was a lot of outreach. We told them about our mission in New Orleans, and we were able to get a lot of people of color and a very diverse group of employees to come and join the Corps of Engineers in New Orleans. And I sat on a panel about this, and they were asking questions about how do we get more diversity, and it was a pretty simple answer to me. The answer is you go out and engage. You go out and develop relationships with those HBCUs, you get the diversity, and you hire it into your organization. So the effects of that was, in about 3 years, we flipped that number. So in 2010, when I was leaving command, we had 60% of our new employees that were coming in to the district were coming from external to the district. So they were coming from all kinds of sources. We reached out to Puerto Rico through HENAC and hired a lot of Hispanics. We reached out through the HBCUs to bring in minority employees to work in a lot of different functional areas in the district. And that was just the beginning. We did a very significant onboarding process to bring them up to speed. We did a lot of mentoring, especially with our engineers, because that was a critical shortage that we had. And our engineers developed kind of an onboarding and mentor relationship with each engineer that was brought on board. And it was very successful. I mean, there's minorities that were brought on board when I was the commander there that are now serving as resident engineers in Florida in the Everglades. So I think you have to provide that opportunity. It's not something that's passive. You have to be active in the engagement. You have to make sure that you're providing that opportunity across the spectrum for all races and creeds and backgrounds that come in and work for the Corps. Because I think we've talked about it already, that diversity, not just racial diversity, but diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of many other facets make us a better organization.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, that we definitely want to encourage that diversity throughout the organization, particularly as we try to improve the organization and change it for the better. One of the things I wanted to talk about, you talked about active changes and really active measures to improve diversity and to improve the organization overall. I know that one of the things mentioned recently to deal with some of the civil unrest issues and some of the social justice issues from the Army has been Project Inclusion. Could you talk about what that specifically means to the Corps, and if there are additional measures that leadership throughout the Corps are taking to bring some of these social justice issues to the forefront?
Sure. Well, I'll start off talking a little bit about it from a higher level perspective from the Army. The Army back in June, the three key leaders from the Army, Sergeant Major of the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and the Secretary of the Army all jointly signed a message to the Army community about civil unrest. And so that was really, I think, important. It was addressed to the soldiers, family members, civilians, and soldiers for life. So the full spectrum of the military community that includes civilians that work in the Army. And it really talked about some of the frustration that sort of exploded during the civil unrest, because of the racial divisions that do still plague America, and the frustration, the anger, and but the key thing about it is that what they made a statement in their letter. It says, "Our ability to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic, is founded upon a sacred trust with the American people. Racial division erodes that trust." So I think what really at the Army level, the Army has really set the standard under this Project Inclusion that you refer to about how do we take our Army values and define a culture that we want in the Army, that we treat people with dignity and respect regardless of their racial background, their ethnicity, or any other aspect of them. And so what we're really I think what this Project Inclusion is trying to do is foster an equitable and inclusive environment so that you can build on the diversity that we want and adapt and build cohesive teams that make the Army a better place to work in and to work for. So every team member needs that opportunity to excel. And so I think in Project Inclusion, what they're really looking at is developing some small group breakouts, listening sessions. We have a operations order that was put out on the 2nd of September. It kind of lays out a way to do that. I saw an email this morning that came from HEXA that talked about how the Army's doing that. And there's going to be some listening sessions at all levels. And really what those listening sessions are aimed at is to better understand, build trust, and really to shape action plans that really affirm a commitment that we're actually going to do something about this. So that's the key thing they talk about. General McConville, one of his, under his key things, people first. That's his operationalizing people first is as a command priority for the Army. Is his focus is deeds, not words. So I think what we're really trying to do in this whole effort of Project Inclusion is to really start at the kind of grassroots level, get an understanding of where that frustration and anger is coming from, and then try to build concrete steps to address the issues that have been identified from our workforce and from the minority communities throughout the U.S., and particularly the ones that work in the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lee. I think on the civil unrest, one thing with this podcast and moving forward is we're going to try to aid in that conversation, and we plan to have a special series just focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion for the agency, and focusing on leadership and how they can have those conversations with staff. So really appreciate your insight into this very important topic. And just generally, I wanted to thank you for joining us today in our first Inside the Castle podcast. We really appreciate you giving us your thoughts on this and everything we just discussed today. For all of our listeners out there, If you have questions for us, please go to our website and submit us our questions. We want to hear from you. We want to know the topics that you're interested in. We want to know the people that you're interested in hearing from. So with that, thanks, everybody, and we'll see you again.
All right. Thanks, team.
Thanks for joining us for this Inside the Castle podcast. To provide your feedback, email us at cw.infrastructure.team@usace.army.mil. Stay tuned for additional Inside the Castle podcasts as we explore life inside the Corps and revolutionize civil works together.